I'm Adrianna. I'm a UI engineer at SalesLoft. I work on the front end enablement team, which means we help other teams build out components for them. We maintain a library of components. We kind of set the standard of things that how you should use React, how you should use certain libraries and all that. We kind of help with that. We have a great culture. We have great core values. And we're also hiring. So if you by any chance are looking for a position, I know that we're hiring full stack engineers. I'm not sure about UI engineers. If you haven't yet, please visit our booth. We are a sponsor. If you see on your shirts, I think we sponsored the shirts this year. I don't know what else we did. But we usually sponsor a lot of things with Erica Stanley and Angel Banks and Beth Lang. So before I got hired as a UI engineer at SalesLoft, I actually worked at an agency building out MVPs for products. I was hired as a React Native apprentice. So right out of college, I was hired to build mobile apps. And so after that, it was like, okay, let's build MVPs. MVP is a minimal viable product, if you didn't know. And we build ideas based off people's ideas who want to build things that they've come up with, or small businesses that have contract work. After React Native, I learned Rails apps, and then I got to lead my first React project. The React project was a dashboard. It was a beautiful project I had. I had no experience with React, but I used a lot of documentation and a lot of tutorials in order to help me learn it. And then I realized by then, I didn't want to work at the agency anymore. I wanted to be a full-time React developer. And so that's when I started to interview with a lot of companies so that I could get my first React role. Obviously, it was a lot of fails, a lot of failed technical interviews. So I'm going to be vulnerable with you guys a lot. I'm going to tell you all the times I failed. I'm going to tell you with what companies and everything, because there's no malice. I've learned so much from these companies. And so that's the reason why for this topic, I think it could help a lot of people who are looking for their next React role, whether you graduated from college, whether you graduated from a boot camp or anything like that. But basically just based off of React only, no Redux or anything if you're looking for any of that. Okay. These are going to be the topics we're going to learn about. Yeah, I love that game. It's a lot of stuff. I hope I can cover everything. I honestly did not prepare for timing on this stuff, but as long as I can get into everything. If not, there's a lot of like resources at the very end that show you as to like what helped me find all the things that I needed. But yeah, we'll go through everything. I don't want you guys to think this is like an intro to React type of thing. It's not. It's more of like you have a basic knowledge of React, but you're ready to go ahead and start interviewing, okay? Like, I'm not gonna go over any basic stuff, but there will be one basic question, which is the what is React type of thing, but we'll lead into that. For every slide, there's gonna be a story for an interview that I had that related as to why I think it should have been on this talk. Okay, let me get a drink of water because I'm nervous. Okay, so when I started interviewing, I was so lucky, none of my technical interviews had whiteboarding. And if it did, I probably would do it knowing that I would have failed because I get freaked out at whiteboarding. I whiteboard at work. I don't know why it's so different when you're under pressure. I mean, I guess just because you're under pressure. So I just want to let you know that if you do ever come across where you do have to do a whiteboarding technical interview, like when you are preparing to get into that interview process, always ask, like, what's the technical interview going to look like? Am I going to do whiteboarding? Am I going to do a GitHub repo? Are there assessments, pair programming, questions? Ask. If you feel uncomfortable with whiteboarding, ask them, can we do a different way? I don't think that's the best way to test my knowledge of, or for you to figure out if that's my knowledge of React. So yeah, we'll talk about those things, and let me see. And then, so in all these companies, yeah, I had all these type of GitHub repos. With SalesLoft, it was a GitHub repo. Assessments, it was CNN, pair programming was in most of the jobs, and conceptual questions over like the phone. They usually do phone interview. They always do like those conceptual questions. I got hammered in one interview with so many conceptual questions that he didn't even give me enough time to ask him questions. So yeah, hate that part. Right. So we're gonna go into the most common question I always get in technical interviews. They always ask you, what's your interpretation of React? So when you talk about React, you don't want to say, oh, it's just a JavaScript UI library. I mean, that's obvious. That you got that from the internet, or you know what it is already, right? You know that this is all that it's made out of. You want to give your own interpretation. So always make sure that you have already prepared what you think React is. My kind of thing is like, if there's a model view, if you know about the MVC framework, model view and controller, it's the view part of it. It's not like Angular or Ember or Backbone. So I usually like to say it's like it's a way for us to write UIs in JavaScript and for it to get transpiled to HTML and get hit on the DOM. And so then that leads to another question. They'll probably ask you, what is the DOM? And you know, that's going to be your interface for web pages, for anything. I mean, at that point, when you're doing an inspector, when you're in the browser, that's the DOM for you right there. So you always want to make sure that you have a good foundation of what you would interpret yourself as React. It doesn't have to be mine. It's your own interpretation. Okay. So now this is the biggest part of React, state and props. You want to know the difference. When I was having the conceptual interview with the company FlexDrive, he asked me the question, which is changeable, state or props? And I'm like, you can change both. And like at the time, I didn't understand that concept. Like I knew how to use state and props. I knew how to build out a component and all that, but I didn't think about it in the way that you can't change props. Props is considered immutable, but state, the data that you pass in, that's changeable. That's going to be changeable in your components. So that's going to be very important if you ever get asked those conceptual questions about state versus props and those type of things. There's big differences, but either way, they are very vital to your components. Okay, so have you guys heard the concept of prop drilling? Yeah, raise hands. Okay, cool. So when I had an interview, I had like a GitHub repo that was already prepared for me in order to pull in a weather API, and they already gave me components already built out that I had to put down all the data. In this example right here, this is actually an example pulled off a Ken C. Dodd's article on prop drilling, which is very informative and very kind of tells you what are the pros and cons of it, but it kind of gives you an idea as to how prop drilling works in regards to where you have to start off when you start setting your props, and then passing them up to another component and then to the final component up there. It's going to be very helpful when you're creating large lists and you have a component that has a specific set of styles or anything, and then you want to put it into a larger list. Obviously, React is component based, or it's composable. It's supposed to be for things used over and over. And then there's this little image that kind of like shows you the funnel of how you can pass props from parent to child, but you can't pass props up from child to parent unless you're using callbacks or if you're lifting state up. So that's going to be very important when they start asking you, oh, like how do you pass props down, or like how do you use props? How do you get them how does the parent and child relationship work? Okay. Anybody familiar with React hooks yet since it's been out? Yeah, raise your hands. Okay, cool. So I started interviewing. React hooks wasn't out yet. It was actually probably a few months after I got hired at SalesLoft where React hooks were finally finalized. I don't know how companies are. I know my company, they update things quickly, and in regards as long as it's in its final form, we don't do beta or anything like that. There'll be some people who like to test out those things, that like to experiment, but other than that, we don't. We make sure our stuff is updated. So I'm not too sure if when you guys go into interviews, I think it's going to be very important to figure out what React version the company is in. That's important to ask, because it's going to be dependent on if you feel comfortable with the old lifecycle hooks or React hooks. And so if you feel comfortable with either one, you've got to figure out which ones are going to be the best ones to use. And so these are not all the lifecycle hooks, but these are the very main ones that you'll see. And even for React hooks, there's even more, and you can build your custom ones. I would really recommend that you learn how to use hooks. I actually had a conversation with my colleague the other day, Ray, and I kind of asked him, I was like, in order for you to learn React hooks, you should just go ahead and learn lifecycle hooks so you know what's happening under the hood, right? Wrong. That is not what you want to do. Well, you can if you want to. No one's stopping you. But, but why? React hooks is so much better. And believe me, it took a while to understand it, but it's so much worth it. So you actually don't want to do it because lifecycle hooks, when they were made against React's way, because React is declarative and lifecycle hooks are more imperative. And so if you know anything about that, you know that React, they're trying to move away from classes. You need a class in order to you need class in order for the lifecycle hooks. For your React hooks, you don't need to build your React component into a class. So it's important. It's okay to know about it, but there's no point anymore. You can, in the latest React version, you can use both, no breaking changes, it's whatever. So yeah, that was a misconception I had, and he kind of put it into perspective as to React hooks is more of what React is about versus what React is not about with lifecycle hooks. I hope that makes sense for y'all. Okay, so the reason why, so from here on, I won't be doing any lifecycle hooks. I was thinking about doing it, but I was just like, it's going to be way too much for no reason at all. One of the biggest questions is getting asked, like, okay, so how do you make an API call? Because you're going to be dealing with APIs, I'm assuming so. As a UI engineer, you got to pull in data from somewhere, from whatever API your company has built or from another external third-party API. So your const right here where you're setting data, set data, and use state, that's right there. That's the same thing if you were to use the constructor in a class. And right here for use effect, that's the same thing as if you were doing component did update. I think the only thing that it's not doing, if I'm not mistaken, is that it's not ending the call, which is another important thing. If you were using lifecycle hooks, component did update would be the one. And if I'm not mistaken, component will unmount would be what you use to unsubscribe the call so you don't have any memory leaks. So yeah, this is the basic way how you would do it. And this is one of the questions that I got asked at CNN. And he wanted me to do the regular fetch. I was like, I don't know how to do the regular fetch because I never learned because I'm spoiled. I learned Axios. So Axios is a great library to use to make those API calls. Also, if you have a API key that you need to send on through, I would really recommend learning that if you don't already. So when he asked me, I was like, I don't know how to do it with a regular fetch, but I know how to do it with Axios. He was like, okay, so describe to me how you would do it with Axios. And I explained it to him. And then another person who was interviewing, we started talking about conceptually, what would you do would you do it straight into the component did update if I was using lifecycle hooks? But no, you wouldn't do it. You would make it its own function, and then you call it into component did update. I'm sorry if I'm confusing you between going lifecycle hooks and React hooks. Probably a little confusing, but I apologize for that. But I just don't know, just if you guys end up figuring out like what React version they're on, that probably will be important. Or you might, just the same explanation I just gave you, it's important that the company upgrades their React so they are on the latest. And then you can explain them that situation as to why you'll look smart. All right, let me see if there's anything more. All right, cool. So these are going to be really important things to know. So when I was doing the conceptual interview, it was they were asking me, have you ever used map? Have you ever used for each? Have you ever used find? I never used reduce. And I did, in my CNN interview, I had to use split. It was pretty funny. It was kind of like a pair programming where they put a laptop in front of me and they gave me a question already on the screen. And they were like, okay, this is the problem. We want you to split it up. We want you to learn how to use split. And so they let me use documentation. They were like, you can use Google, you can use whatever you want. You just have to do it in front of us. That's it. And so we worked on it together. So I use all these JS built-in functions. I use them all the time at work, so they are going to be very helpful. Companies do want you to know how to use those functions. The ones that are starred are the ones that we're going to go over. I'm not going to go over any other ones that are not starred. We are going to go over the ES6 features, though. If we are going to go over that, so we're going to go through map and for each. Okay, so so I always get confused. Even like while I'm on work, I'm like, which one should I use, map or for each, and I always get confused. And it's not until like I actually do some research. I'm like, oh, all right, I need to use map. Map is gonna probably be the most one that you use because it is performant. It is a lot better versus for each. With map, you actually get a new array return. When you use for each, you are supposed to use it with another function to pass in through so that you can apply it to every item in the array, but you're not gonna get anything returned back. I know that says array, whatever that is returned. It's just an example of what you'll get if you get back the array, but you will always get undefined with for each, just to let you know. So it's always important to know between those two different things. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay. All right, arrow functions. I mean, this is pretty simple. It's just a new way of writing functions. You don't have to use the keyword function now. You can do a one-liner. I remember when I was pair programming with my coworker Leroy, and I was trying to figure out why something wasn't returning back. So when you do certain things, like you see that second one, ES6 return, you don't have to do all those type of things. You can just do that one liner right there. If you don't have unless you're returning like a whole component and all that, you need to stretch it out. You're gonna have to return with the curly braces. So yeah, those are just some simple things. You can still do it the old way if you want to. If you want to write out the whole keyword, that's up to you. All right. This is probably always the most confusing to me till this day, var versus let versus cons. I always use cons, but if you're writing code and you're writing different functions and stuff and you need certain variables, you're going to run into issues and not even know that it's related to this. With var, okay, so with var, you can be inside of a function. It'll get used in that, but outside of that, you're not going to be able to use it. With let, it is block scope. So if you're inside of a curly brace, you can reuse it. But once you leave out of there, it's not going to be the same. So with cons, my very favorite, I always use it no matter what, even when I probably shouldn't. It's the one, it's exactly like let, but you can't reassign it again. And I remember the other day at work, I was like, I need to reassign this one variable and it's not working. And it wasn't until I realized, oh fuck, I can't do that. So yeah, you'll learn, okay, so when between this, you need to learn the concept of scope. You need to learn hoisting as well. When something is unset, when you set a variable or whatever, it's automatically undefined unless you set it that way. You need to learn about those things as well. They might ask you, I remember at the CNN, he was like, what's your preference on let, const, and all? I was like, I just always use const, and that was my lack of knowledge on the differences and stuff, and I was just like, I always just use const unless I need to verify if I need to use let or var. Yeah. Okay, destructuring. This is not really too big. It's pretty awesome to do it this way instead of constantly going into setting every single one to the same thing when you can just put it in that object right there. It's destructuring. They're going to ask you if you do know how to destructure, do you know how to put things in one line instead of setting all these variables at that point. And then the spread operator. So I knew about the spread for a very long time, but because I wanted to understand props and the way everything was passing through, I didn't use the spread operator for a while. But it is very helpful in order to, when you're rewriting components over and over, and if you've got a long list of props that you're being passed down, you don't want to write each one of them. It's also important that you're keeping up with the names, because it can get pretty messy if you're not keeping up with the names and one name is off or something like that. This makes it a lot easier to work with. But in regards to if you're looking at data, you need to figure out what props are being passed in if that isn't clear enough for you sometimes. Okay, have y'all messed with sets? No? Nobody? Yeah? Can I get a hands go? Okay, sets are awesome if you don't want duplicates. if you don't want duplicates. I had a situation where I didn't need duplicates. It was a weird situation. But sets are awesome because you can pass an array through my set. It'll take out all the duplicates for you. Even if you add more than one time, like if you're doing like a for each and you need to add something and you can't stop that, it still won't add it. It still won't add a second one. So you're good. And so add, has, size, delete, those are all functions that are attached to the set that you can use. It's important to use a set because if you want to use a regular array, you're gonna have, and you need to take out those duplicates, you're gonna have to filter that out. You're gonna have to do all that extra work for what? If you got set, there's really great documentation on the JavaScript Mozilla thing that helps you learn how to use this. This is actually from that as well, and so this is really important to use. And it just overall, like if I know one example. If you got like a set of tags and there's a whole bunch of duplicates on them and you want to return I want to return a tag of each one, that list, use a set. It's going to be very helpful and probably in any assessment or project that you probably have to pull in. Cool. So I actually am speaking at React ATL next week on Tuesday about React Testing Library. If you guys are interested, I just wanted to put that out there before anything. It will be at the Full Story offices. Are y'all local to Atlanta? Who's local to Atlanta? Oh shit, awesome. I was totally guessing people were gonna be out of town, but that's cool. I hope you guys can make it. All right, any questions?
So about sets, is it, I know like an array is also an object, but does it make an array or does it make an object, or can it be either?
So it starts off as an object first, but if you pass in brackets inside, you can set it off as an array.
Okay, so it could be either. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yes, definitely. This is awkward, guys. Questions.
What was your hardest interview question?
My hardest interview question? Hold on, let me think about that for a second. Okay, so I have a goal where I like to interview with Apple every year. I never make it. Like I always get the technical interview. I fail it because but I think so I always try to make that goal, and they always ask really hard things. They're Apple, obviously. But I think when I did it, I didn't know how to use map at the time. You think now it's easy now, right? But at the time, I was way over in my head. I was like, let me just try it. And that was a hard question for me at the time because I wasn't knowledgeable in it. And that was early last year. So look where I am now. Yeah. So we'll see maybe hopefully next time. Yes, Raquel?
Yeah, so what's your advice for, if you were into the first time? Like, what's the mindset you should go into over and over again? What do you do after you
Okay, so honestly, I've always been nervous for technical interviews, but I have a feature about me where I just throw myself into things, but not everybody has that feature about themselves, right? What I've recently heard about, and my colleague Ray also told me about, and I read it in a book, is if you're nervous as hell for something and you're like getting the jitters, don't convince yourself that you're nervous. Say that I'm excited. Say it over and over. Don't even say the N-word. I can't say that. It's horrible. The context. Okay, it's horrible. Okay. Just don't say it. Don't put it in your mind. Just keep saying I'm excited and say it out loud. That's what I've been doing this whole time before this talk. This whole talk. But that's I hope that helps in some way. And then like I failed a lot of technical interviews and I cried about it. Obviously, I was emotional about it all the time. But there's gonna be a company out there that sees your potential. You have to interview these companies as much as they interview you. So don't forget that. Don't be mad that you failed at a technical interview, but you know that they have a shitty culture. Like why would you be mad at that? You did yourself a favor. Think about that. Yes.
So when you're preparing for technical interviews and you know you're going to be doing maybe like a lot in a row because that's just where you're at in your job search, as far as for learning these types of things, is it better to like practice using them like in projects, or is it better just to kind of like read and drill more so these concepts? So if I want to get better at Reduce, should I just like read about it, or is there like a way for me to like practice using it?
Reduce is a monster, and I remember when Ray was trying to teach me Reduce, I was like, what the fuck is this? But it's a pretty awesome. Once you get it down, you're like, oh shit, this shit's awesome.
My teacher keeps telling me, but I'm like,
Play with it. Play with it. Play with it, and make sure you figure out all the parameters to it, and make sure that you can use all the parameters. Use it without, because then it does help you realize, okay, so this is an example of how I can use it, and then I can describe it conceptually later. Yeah.
So if you're in an interview and you see it's kind of going like that, is there any way to like stop it too early that you can like stop it too early and you're not gonna do it?
Don't be hard on yourself. I mean, I know that, yeah, I've definitely had technical interviews gone bad, and I'll just be like, straight up, I'm a little jittery. I apologize for that. And if the interviewer is empathetic, they'll understand. I've had very empathetic interviews, but you're not going to have that case all the time. I think it's just talking about, maybe if you don't know certain things, start talking about things you do know. Start bragging the hell out of yourself about what you do know and how much you're willing to learn, even though if you don't know it right there at that moment at that technical interview. I think it's important to companies love hiring people who want to learn. You never get out of that mindset as a programmer. Yes.
What's like your list of questions that you always make sure you ask the companies to assess if they're good for you?
One is a tech stack. I'm very, like, when I was worried about the tech stack and stuff, I really wanted React. I didn't want anything else. But another good thing is to figure out culture-wise, if they have how many, so and all that, I always ask, if I know people there, I'll ask how many Black or Latino are there. Like, that's for my per se thing, because that lets me know that they care about inclusion and diversity. I've worked at a company before where it was all white employees. It was all Christian employees, and I wasn't a great fit, but I made it last. But over time, your mind starts to dwell on those things, and you don't want that. Another thing is you need to ask them what their mentorship looks like. Do they have senior devs that will be there for you when you need that help? Who would be who you report to? And another thing would be like, what does it look like with pair programming? Do you guys do pair programming? Do you guys talk about certain situations? It also depends on like how their sprints look. Like, how do they organize their work in regards to figuring out if they talk about the work that you need to do, or do they just throw it up on you before doing any planning and stuff? I think those things are important instead of letting you get dumped on a bunch of projects. And also to ask what your path looks like. A lot of companies will hire for a role, but then they don't know how to keep you. They don't know how to make you stay, because you'll be there, but then what happens after the role? Do you get promoted? How do you get promoted? What do you need to do? What does your roadmap look like? Those are good questions to ask, I think. Any more? If not, I want to take a picture. Okay. I wish I had a selfie stick. Oh man, that red light. All right, I got it. Awesome. Thanks, guys.